Hello everybody, how are you doing today? I hope you're doing well. Ben here from Hardcore Literature, and today we're going to be reacting to the top 100 greatest novels written in English. The Guardian newspaper some years back put out this list and it became rather controversial. It came under heavy fire and criticism for not being representative and for leaving key works out. So what I would like to do today is invite you to make yourself comfortable, grab yourself a drink, and let's go through this list together, starting with number 100. Rightio, I hope you're sitting comfortably and you've got yourself a nice drink like me. Before we dive into the list, it might be worth saying something briefly on the nature of lists and canons. These lists always come under attack for what they do not include, for what they exclude, but by their very nature, they have to exclude something. Now, obviously, it can be very telling what gets excluded, and it can be very telling what is included, and sometimes we can't see the underlying reason. We hope when it comes to art and great literature that above all, the rationale underpinning the choice is aesthetic merit, aesthetic and cognitive splendour. We hope that's the choice. So that's the criteria that I rank and will rank the books ordered in this list. That's what I'll be looking out for. And it's also worth saying that we're always making lists and they're always kind of personal. We can be objective about art. We can be objective about the great books. And we try to. We want to sharpen our critical appreciation and our aesthetic appreciation. And we want to know why one thing is good and why perhaps another isn't as good, where one author excels and another author falls down. We want to be able to say that objectively. But at the end of the day, we will always have our own subjective, personal canon that we carry around in our hearts. And my personal canon is going to look a little bit different from your personal canon. And we can meet in the middle and find mutual appreciation for artists that we know are objectively good. But ultimately, as we go through these books, we are trying to see what stays and what we want to push away for the time being. And very often, some of these books and these authors will find us at a different time in our lives. And I think that's worth saying when we dive into a list. It's also worth saying, because I get this a lot, that I'm almost certainly going to come up against a couple of books in this list, this top 100, that I personally haven't read. For some reason, people seem to think that I've read absolutely everything. I have read quite a lot. That was my degree at Oxford. We studied English language and literature. I read voraciously. I tear through books. I have a huge appetite for novels, but there are many works that I haven't read and that I will never hope to read. And that's part of the tragedy, that our lives are not long enough to read everything worth reading. But then that's where the utility and the value of a list and a canon comes in, because it helps direct us and says, hey, you haven't got infinite amount of years. You're not going to live until the age of 1,000, and you can't fill up every day, every minute, every second with reading. So you have to be selective, you have to curate, and you have to pick those special books that are potentially going to resonate with you and change your life more than potentially other books. So I'm intrigued to see what made the list. I'm intrigued to see which novels I haven't personally come across. And I have my eyes open for my own favourite novels, the ones that I think should be on the list. And I want to see where they rank. I've deliberately not looked at this list yet because I want this to be my first look with you. So, with all that said, let's dive in. Right here, let's dive in. This is number 100. And I immediately don't really recognise this. Now, I kind of recognise the name. I know that this is a Booker Prize winner, and I also know that 100 is a lot of novels. Recently, Marie Kondo, the life-changing magic of tidying up lady, challenged a book hoarder to create a list of 30 books. Now, if you're a real book hoarder and you absolutely cannot let any book go, then this is quite a valuable exercise. I personally couldn't imagine only having 30. But when you challenge yourself to pick the 30 books that mean the most to you, you find that 30 can actually be a little bit of a stretch, even for us book lovers. So 100 is difficult. But I do not really recognise, I definitely haven't read number 100, True History of the Kelly Gang by Peter Carey, 2000. It's a Booker Prize winning tour de force examining the life and times of Australia's infamous anti-hero, Ned Kelly. Disgrace by J.M. Coetzee, 1999. That's at spot number 99. I have this book. I've dipped into it and some of Coetzee's other stuff, but I can't say I've read it in any depth. And this is another Booker winning masterpiece. Now, I think those who have watched some of my videos already know my opinion on some of the book prize winners. I don't know if many of them will endure. I think a lot of them are period pieces. I think a lot of them are style over substance, and the style isn't that good anyway. It's all been done now. This is not me saying that of either of these two. I just haven't read them. But I have come up against some issues with prize winners time and again. Of course, I've found many great prize winners that I still cherish today. So, bit of a mixed bag is what I'm saying. So Disgrace is at number 99. Coetzee's intensely human vision infuses a fictional world that both invites and confounds political interpretation, right? Number 98, okay, Don DeLillo, Underworld. Underworld, okay, so he's picking Underworld as opposed to Mao 2, as opposed to White Noise. White Noise is good. Underworld is good. Most of it's really good. Apparently, Don DeLillo is one of the kindest writers writing today. I think he does some really extraordinary things. I think his literature is valuable as a modern or postmodern writer. He's definitely up there. Underworld's great. It's a big book. If you like those big, solid, thick postmodern books like Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, and you haven't read Underworld, then you probably should check it out. Should it be 98 in the best novels written in English ever? Well, we'll see. We'll see what comes ahead. And we're told that this 1997 novelist is a writer of frightening perception. Don DeLillo guides the reader in an epic journey through America's history and popular culture. Okay. I read DeLillo's latest, which seemed like it was more suited to being printed in a magazine. It came out in hardback and I pre-ordered it. I don't know if I was too bothered with that. I've read most of his stuff and I quite like it. I need to reread Underworld, certainly. Number 97, Amongst Women by John McCarhan, 1990. Okay, so far, and I know this is near the 100 end of the spectrum, the ranking. So far I'm seeing a lot of really recent novels, and in my opinion the best novels that have ever been written, they're not always going to be clustered close to our time. I've not seen any good novels come out in a while. I think the novel of our century is currently being written, and events that have happened recently will all go to inform the writer who is brooding and working today. Maybe not even working, maybe not even born yet. But I think there could even be a writer watching this now who in 10 or 20 or 30 years time will write a masterpiece. I don't think it's been written yet. The Les Miserables of our time, for example, hasn't been written. This is a modern Irish masterpiece, and it's a study of the fault lines of Irish patriarchy and an elegy for a lost world. And next up at 96 we have Breathing Lessons by Anne Tyler, 1988. Anne Tyler's portrayal of a middle-aged mid-American marriage displays her narrative clarity, comic timing and ear for American speech to perfection. Then we have number 95, The Beginning of Spring by Penelope Fitzgerald, 1988 again. Fitzgerald's story set in Russia just before the Bolshevik Revolution is her masterpiece, a brilliant miniature whose peculiar magic almost defies analysis. And then at 94, another author that I recognise. I don't really recognise some of these, I haven't really read them. An Artist of the Floating World by Kazuo Ishiguro, 1986. Now I wonder, are they limiting themselves to one novel per artist? If so, I wonder what made them choose this one by Kazuo Ishiguro. Ishiguro, whose most recent Clara with the Sun I had high hopes for. I got about halfway through. I was enjoying it, but I haven't read a lot of classics and epic narratives recently with really decadent, luxurious, resplendent prose. I'm thinking of Proust, I'm thinking of Joyce, and the imaginative powers of novelists like Dickens. I kind of abandoned it. I do need to go back to it because I thought it was very thought-provoking, especially as we slide into a world filled with AI and all the different ethical dilemmas surrounding that. So I do need to finish that. I would put Never Let Me Go above An Artist of the Floating World, but perhaps I need to revisit both of them. We're told that Kazuo Ishiguro's novel about a retired artist in post-war Japan, reflecting on his career during the country's dark years, is a tour de force of unreliable narration. Let's see the next one. 93, Money, A Suicide Note by Martin Amis. Never really got on board with Martin Amis. I know some people love him. Martin Amis's era-defining ode to excess unleashed one of literature's greatest modern monsters in self-destructive anti-hero John Self. Then we get Housekeeping by Marilynne Robinson, 1981. Again, I'm wondering if I'm going to see any novels that I fully recognise rather than just dimly aware of. But hey, Marilynne Robinson's tale of orphan sisters and their oddball aunt in a remote Idaho town is admired by everyone from Barack Obama to Bret Easton Ellis. Then we have Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie, 1981. Salman Rushdie, who is no stranger to courting controversy, particularly with his satanic verses. Midnight's Children, I think the prose was quite nice. You could kind of eat it, couldn't you? And he was early magical realism, at least early modern or postmodern magical realism. Salman Rushdie, I suppose I need to return to his works. Again, we're told that the personal and the historical merge in Salman Rushdie's dazzling, game-changing Indian English novel of a young man born at the very moment of Indian independence. Okay, at number 90 we have A Bend in the River by V.S. Naipaul, 1979. V.S. Naipaul's hellish vision of an African nation's path to independence saw him accused of racism, but remains his masterpiece. 89, Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison, 1977. Yeah, a lot of people will try to argue that Beloved is her best, but I am fully of the opinion that it is Song of Solomon. Toni Morrison, one of the best postmodern, if you can call her postmodern. I kind of don't like the term postmodern. I prefer modern. But essentially, I suppose modernism ended in 1960, 1965, and now we're in the postmodern era. But hey, I think we're all kind of writing in the same tradition, even into this century. But Toni Morrison, Song of Solomon, great novel. If you like William Faulkner and the Faulknerian tradition, if you like the high literature of the Bible, then you will love Song of Solomon. It's a difficult read, but it is a great novel, and there's a handful of great novels that were written and published in the 20th century, and Song of Solomon most certainly is one of them. So it's nice to see this one has made the list. I'm somewhat surprised it's not a little bit higher, so I'm intrigued to see what's next. 88, Rabbit Redux by John Updike, 1971. Updike, I never really fully got into him. Perhaps I maybe even dismissed him a little bit, and a long time ago. Maybe I need to revisit that. I'm not sure if I would put Updike just above Toni Morrison. I'd flip it the other way around, personally. But anyway, so we're told of Song of Solomon. The novel with which the Nobel Prize-winning author established her name is a kaleidoscopic evocation of the African-American experience in the 20th century. And then, with Rabbit Redux, Harry Rabbit Angstrom, Updike's lovably mediocre alter ego, is one of America's great literary protagonists, up there with Huck Finn and Jay Gatsby. 87, Mrs. Palfrey at the Claremont by Elizabeth Taylor, 1971. Elizabeth Taylor's exquisitely drawn character study of eccentricity in old age is a sharp and witty portrait of genteel post-war English life facing the changes taking shape in the 60s. Then we have a Philip Roth. I'm not surprised to see Philip Roth there. Any number of his novels could have made the cut. They have gone for Portnoy's Complaint at 86. This wickedly funny novel about a young Jewish American's obsession with masturbation caused outrage on publication, but remains his most dazzling work. When I think of Philip Roth, I think of my friend from Oxford who wrote his final author special or author specific paper, his last dissertation on Philip Roth. And we would meet, we would take breaks. I was writing on the Beat Generation, Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg. We would take breaks when we were writing outside the library, and he would talk to me about Philip Roth and I would talk to him about the Beat Generation, and I've got good memories discussing Philip Roth. 85, we have The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, 1966. Sylvia Plath, you can't really say her name without summoning her tragic demise. Her poetry, I love it. It's not Emily Dickinson, but it does speak to me, and when I'm in a particularly foul or black mood, I find myself in simpatico with her poetry. The Bell Jar, okay, 85. Sylvia Plath's painfully graphic Ramona Clef, in which a woman struggles with her identity in the face of social pressure, is a key text of Anglo-American feminism. I need to reread this. I was very, very young when I last read it, and it would definitely bear or deserve a reread, as would the next one, 84, In Cold Blood by Truman Capote, 1966. I wonder if this is just coincidental, but the further into the list, the further towards number 1 we find ourselves, the more the novels start to go back in time a little bit. They get a bit further away from the current day, don't they? So In Cold Blood, Truman Capote's non-fiction novel, a true story of bloody murder in rural Kansas, opens a window on the dark underbelly of post-war America. Yeah, Capote's work is brilliant for two types of reader. That reader who wants to understand post-war America a little bit, but also anybody looking to write gripping non-fiction, really crisp, beautiful non-fiction, compellingly told, true stories, would do well to study Truman Capote, most certainly. Next up, 83, A Single Man by Christopher Isherwood, 1964. Christopher Isherwood's story of a gay Englishman struggling with bereavement in LA is a work of compressed brilliance. Next up, 82, A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. This is interesting. Burgess, yeah, he did some incredible things with the English language. Now, he wasn't a Joyce, he was no James Joyce, but he still did some very, very cool things, and it's almost a shame that it's only A Clockwork Orange that gets the attention of his works, and also that's partly due to the fact that Stanley Kubrick made a mesmerising but horrific dystopian filmic adaptation of that short work. This is a work where I don't currently have it, because every time I buy it, I lend it to someone and they never give it back. If you're interested in linguistics, great. It's very violent. It takes a little time to get your bearings in the world and get used to the slang, but it's a cool book. And because it's such a slim read, it's worth picking up and diving into if you haven't. Anthony Burgess's dystopian classic still continues to startle and provoke, refusing to be outshone by Stanley Kubrick's brilliant film adaptation. I'd say they're neck and neck. Kubrick gets a lot of criticism himself. One of my favourite films of all time is a Kubrick film, Barry Lyndon. You have 2001, The Shining. A lot of people will say that it's not as good as the book. They're kind of different, so it's a different thing, the film. But I like Kubrick. I think he's good. I think he's a genius director. Let's go on to 81, The Golden Notebook by Doris Lessing. Hailed as one of the key texts of the women's movement of the 1960s, this study of a divorced single mother's search for personal and political identity remains a defiant, ambitious tour de force. Okay, so the further down the list we go, the nearer we get to number 1, the more I get more comfortable with the books, I recognise them more, and this is also a nice reminder to reread some of these. Many of these are books that I read when I was very young, and I know from recently rereading many of my favourite classics, I know that they take on a completely different quality when you become more mature, when you bring lived experience to the work. If you've read a book that's a classic, but you read it in your teenage years and you're quite a bit older now, I would implore you to pretend you haven't read it. Just consider the fact that you haven't actually read it. Give it a reread. It'll be a different book. You'll be absolutely blown away. If it's a great book, you'll be blown away at how much clicks into place. The rewards are great when it comes to rereading great works. Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. Number 80. This acerbic anti-war novel was slow to fire the public imagination, but is rightly regarded as a groundbreaking critique of military madness. Now, I'd say this is a bit of a stereotypical man's novel. I would throw Joseph Heller's work in with some of Hemingway's work, and it's definitely good. If you're thinking of enlisting, if you're thinking of becoming part of the military, or indeed if you already are or have been, then this is most certainly a novel that you should read. 79, good one. Muriel Spark, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, another slim one. And if you haven't read it, I would recommend it. Short and bittersweet. Yeah, it's slim. Muriel Spark's tale of the downfall of a Scottish schoolmistress is a masterpiece of narrative fiction. Yeah, masterpiece of narrative fiction is also... It also really reveals Spark's gift of creating character, good character. It's a good one. 78, To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, 1960. To Kill a Mockingbird, what a book. And what a film was made out of it. I remember some years ago that after Harper Lee passed away, they tried to publish another one of her books. I never looked into this. I know it hit all the bestseller lists because from my understanding, she hadn't really wanted this published, hadn't given her consent. I don't know if this was similar with The Pale King by David Foster Wallace. Perhaps not, he was preparing that for publication. But Harper Lee, yeah, one of the literary tragedies of our time is the fact that such a great novelist only wrote one book. And I recall Stephen King in his On Writing being absolutely bemused by this fact, and I am too. If you've got such a solid gift, what are you doing with your time outside of that? But perhaps the notoriety got to her, perhaps she wanted a quiet life, perhaps she didn't want to say anything more. Whatever the reason, at least we have the gift that is To Kill a Mockingbird. Wonderful story. I'm sure most people have read it. I know in America it's on a lot of the high school reading lists. We don't do that over in England. We don't read it over here. I think it's more pertinent to you guys. It's more part of your tradition. But if you're a Brit, or indeed if you're from anywhere in the world, do read it. It's a great book. Then we've got Voss by Patrick White, a love story set against the disappearance of an explorer in the outback. Voss paved the way for a generation of Australian writers to shrug off the colonial past. I've had this on my bedside for a while, ever since a student that I was consulting with who has a real gift for translation wanted to become a translator, and I would suppose is well on the way to doing that. He recommended this to me as one of his favourite books. I really do need to get into more Australian literature. I need to get into Aboriginal literature. From what I've been told, the rewards are rich and plenty when it comes to that tradition. So I look forward to that. I'm sure many people have read Voss. Is it on the syllabus over in Australia? I feel like it might be. Number 76, On the Road by Jack Kerouac. Okay, right. Many of you might know that On the Road used to be one of my favourite books. In fact, 2 seconds. I'll take this down. So this is hanging above my bed. I don't know if you can see that. That's a framed photo of Jack Kerouac Street, I'm presuming in San Francisco. I was a big Jack Kerouac fan. This was a gift. Jack Kerouac's part of the Beat Generation. He was the reason that I studied the Beat Generation in my finals for my final dissertation in Oxford. I felt really in simpatico with the Piscean Jack. And I still feel something of a kinship with him, but the way he lived out his life, he became an alcoholic, he was a bit of a drunk. It was quite a depressing end to quite a magnificent man, a man who had great gifts, poetic gifts, prosaic gifts, and I saw that he went down one path and I took a different one, and I stopped being able to sympathise too much with him, but I read everything he ever wrote in quite a lot of depth, and I still treasure him. I've tried to return to On the Road, and it wasn't the same. It's a book for youths, it's a book for the young, but it does need to be in this list because there is great poetry to it, there is great poignancy to it. The message at the heart of it does capture the spirit of a generation, and historically it was very important, and sociologically, politically, it had a quite strong knock-on effect in the culture. You can't really say you understand American literature, indeed American culture, without reading Jack Kerouac's On the Road. I personally think Dharma Bums was his better narrative, but I'm open to being dissuaded on that. But On the Road, it created so many great writers, inspired so many people, so it definitely needs to be on this list. I'll be doing a podcast on on the road quite soon. So yeah, it's I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. The creative history of Kerouac's Beat Generation classic, fueled by pea soup and Benzedrine, has become as famous as the novel itself. Yeah, how he wrote the novel on the teletype paper. Just one long reel, and he just kept typing and typing. Spent years on the road and 3 weeks writing about it. 75, Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov, 1955. Nabokov's tragicomic tour de force crosses the boundaries of good taste with glee. Yeah, I've never been a huge Nabokov fan. I've read much of what he's put out, his short stories, Pale Fire, which is a masterpiece, Lolita, obviously, Speak Memory, his autobiography. I don't resonate with him, though he does have gifts in the English language. He reminds me of Conrad in that regard, Conrad who adopted English as his third language and mastered it more than many of us could ever hope to. Nabokov conducted a series of lectures on Don Quixote, which kind of put me off him, kind of sealed the deal for me on that. I respect him, I think he's a great writer in his own right, but he kind of ragged on my favourite book a little bit. He gave a series of lectures on Don Quixote, and I don't know why he was giving the lectures, in all honesty. So my own lectures on Cervantes' masterpiece, I saw them as something of a remedy to that. One can go down a bit of a rabbit hole and ponder as to why he might have kind of slagged off Don Quixote a little bit, but that's not really relevant. It's not relevant to this anyway. Lolita. Not my favourite novel. The subject matter, of course, isn't something that many would want to spend their free time indulging in, but I think it's an important novel. I think it's a very important novel, and it influenced a lot of writers, and it's worth reading, and you probably will like it and enjoy it. It's a great work, so actually, if you haven't already picked it up, you most certainly should. 74, Lord of the Flies by William Golding, somewhat of a period piece at this point, but Golding's great. I went through a period where I absolutely loved Golding. Lord of the Flies was a recommendation from an English teacher of mine who I respected. I went on and read much of his other works. The Spire is a good one. Golding's great. Golding's good. He's good for binging a little bit. If you haven't read Golding, there's something really special about just getting a stack of his books and tearing through them. Lord of the Flies, of course, we love this story, don't we? Battle Royale, Hunger Games, the latest Squid Game, they're all kind of in the same sentiment, aren't they? But Lord of the Flies, if you haven't read it, which, once again, I would be surprised if many haven't, it's on the syllabus in many schools, then I would highly recommend it. Dismissed at first as rubbish and dull, Golding's brilliantly observed dystopian desert island tale has since become a classic. Next up, 73, Adventures of Augie March by Saul Bellow. Now, I've not read a lot of Saul Bellow, I must say. In the long-running hunt to identify the great American novel, Saul Bellow's picaresque third book frequently hits the mark. So, shall we start picking some bones with this ordering? How is Lord of the Flies above Song of Solomon? How is On the Road above Song of Solomon? And that's from someone who loves On the Road. But hey, should To Kill a Mockingbird be higher up? Should Catch-22 be higher up? I'm sure that the compiler, the curator of this list, probably wrestled with these issues themselves. 72, The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. Great book. I particularly like his short stories. If you haven't already checked out 9 Stories by J.D. Salinger, please do. They're all absolute winners. They're gems. Catcher in the Rye. This is a lot of people's favourite books. A lot of people close to me love this book. I've reread it recently. It was a banned book for a while. And there's a great episode of South Park where Cartman goes and specifically wants to read it because he knows that it was banned, and then he's very disappointed. That's because, by our modern sentiments, there's nothing scandalous or outrageous about this book. Salinger was writing around the time of Rebel Without a Cause, James Dean, and this idea of the teenager wasn't really a thing until around that time. So it absolutely was scandalous at that time, and the mode of expression, the narrative voice, was something that I think readers hadn't really seen before. Does it deserve to be on this list? Absolutely. J.D. Salinger's study of teenage rebellion remains one of the most controversial and best-loved American novels of the 20th century. Then we have The End of the Affair by Graham Greene. Again, Graham Greene. Why are they choosing this instead of another Graham Greene? Personally, I would choose Brighton Rock. Great novel. If you haven't read it, Brighton Rock. Graham Greene's moving tale of adultery and its aftermath ties together several vital strands in his work. Next up, 1984 by George Orwell. Orwell, another period piece writer, another writer who's technically not massively gifted. His prose isn't the most gorgeous or resplendent or precise even, to be honest, but for speculative fiction and for being incredibly influential, oh, he's great. Does he deserve to be in this list? Absolutely. How could he not? Animal Farm, 1984. I would have put Animal Farm above 1984 personally, but 1984 is a book that everybody should read and heed and understand that it's not about that time. It's not about a time that hasn't come to fruition. It's about all time. The same reason we read Orwell. It's the reason we read history is the same reason we read Orwell. I, again, don't think there's anybody who is a literature lover who hasn't already come across Orwell. But if you haven't, start with Animal Farm and then go on to 1984. George Orwell's dystopian classic cost its author dear, but is arguably the best known novel in English of the 20th century. 69. The Heat of the Day by Elizabeth Bowen. Elizabeth Bowen's 1948 novel perfectly captures the atmosphere of London during the Blitz while providing brilliant insights into the human heart. So, I've been wanting to read this one for a while and get into Elizabeth Bowen, so do let me know if you have read her yourself. Next up, Under the Volcano by Malcolm Lowry. Malcolm Lowry's masterpiece about the last hours of an alcoholic ex-diplomat in Mexico is set to the drumbeat of coming conflict. That sounds good, doesn't it? 67, All the King's Men by Robert Penn Warren, 1946. A compelling story of personal and political corruption set in the 1930s in the American South. Okay, they've put this above To Kill a Mockingbird and again above Song of Solomon, which is interesting. But hey, 66, Joy in the Morning by P.G. Wodehouse. P.G. Wodehouse's elegiac Jeeves novel, written during his disastrous years in wartime Germany, remains his masterpiece. I've read a lot of Wodehouse, let me know how it's pronounced, is one who's always worth having on your nightstand by your bed. If you want to laugh, it's good for that. I think Tom Sharp, who's writing in the Wodehousian tradition, is funnier, more laugh out loud funny, but Wodehouse is great. The characters that he's created with Jeeves and Wooster, wonderful. They're like old friends. I love that series. Should he be on this list? Yeah. In a list of 100, and we're talking English novels, then yeah, of course. I don't think he's doing anything groundbreaking though, but he is a bit of an English tradition in his own right. Next up, 65, The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. I would play devil's advocate and say, what about East of Eden? What about Of Mice and Men? But probably East of Eden. These are books that I'm sure are on the syllabus for many American readers. Steinbeck. When we talk about the great American novel, we're always thinking Steinbeck, Twain, Mark Twain, Moby Dick, Melville, Hemingway, I suppose you could say. But that's what immediately leaps to mind for me. One of the greatest of American novels, great American novels. This study of a family torn apart by poverty and desperation in the Great Depression shocked US society. I read this when I was young, and then when I reread it again much older, an older age, I was absolutely astounded at the beauty of Steinbeck's prose. Great writer, absolutely great writer. 64, At Swim Two Birds by Flann O'Brien, 1939. Labyrinthine and multi-layered, Flann O'Brien's humorous debut is both a reflection on and an exemplar of the Irish novel. One of the things that this list came under criticism for was not having enough Irish writers. So I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on that. You may know that my family is Irish. We go well back from Dublin and Cork. Basically, my grandparents came over here, emigrated, but before then, my ancestors just lived around the Dublin-Cork area. So I do like Irish prose. I think some of the best novels in the English language are by Irish writers. 63, Party Going by Henry Green. Set on the eve of war, this neglected modernist masterpiece centres on a group of bright young revellers delayed by fog. Okay. 62, The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler. Yeah, okay, I suppose what they're doing is ordering them by the impact that they've had, the influence they've had, the cultural resonance that they've had, and for those reasons, Raymond Chandler is worth putting in. During lockdown last year, I grabbed a huge stack of paperbacks by Raymond Chandler and just tore through them. There wasn't much else to do, it was dark, we had to stay in, and I just devoured his books. They're very pulpy. They're not great literature, but when I say that, people get offended. That doesn't mean I'm disparaging or not saying it's not worth reading, or it's not a great story, or it doesn't belong on this list, but it's not high art. But does it still belong on this list? Yes. At this position? Not sure, but yes. Raymond Chandler's hard-boiled debut brings to life the seedy LA underworld, and Philip Marlowe, the archetypal fictional detective. Next up, Murphy by Samuel Beckett. Beckett's another one that at Oxford during finals, when people had to choose their special author topic, people went really deep into Beckett. I've kind of earmarked his works for the future. Let me know if you know a good place to start. Is Murphy a good place to start? Samuel Beckett's first published novel is an absurdist masterpiece, a showcase for his uniquely comic voice. Then we have Scoop by Evelyn Waugh. Evelyn Waugh's Fleet Street satire remains sharp, pertinent, and memorable. 59, Tropic of Cancer by Henry Miller. I haven't read Tropic of Cancer, though I do have it somewhere. The US novelist's debut revelled in a Paris underworld of seedy sex and changed the course of the novel, though not without a fight with the censors. 1919 by John Dos Passos. The middle volume of John Dos Passos's USA trilogy is revolutionary in its intent, techniques, and lasting impact. 57. Cold Comfort Farm by Stella Gibbons. The book for which Gibbons is best remembered was a satire of late Victorian pastoral fiction, but went on to influence many subsequent generations. And next up, we have Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, 56, number 56, so placed some way above George Orwell. When we're talking dystopia, and we're talking about 20th century dystopian fiction, it typically does come down to Aldous Huxley versus George Orwell, and their vision or their prophecy of the future is different. I'm reminded of Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death, where he says that it's the Huxleyan future that has come into fruition, not the Orwellian one. I'll leave you to wonder about that yourself. I would hazard to say that this is true. But Brave New World is great. If you haven't already read it, you absolutely should. Aldous Huxley's vision of a future human race controlled by global capitalism is every bit as prescient as Orwell's more famous dystopia. 55, As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner, 1930. The influence of William Faulkner's immersive tale of raw Mississippi rural life can be felt to this day. This is a novel that I chose to discuss in my interview to get into Oxford. We had to choose 7 books that we wanted to speak about, and I brought them to the interview with me, and As I Lay Dying was one of them. I don't recall that we spoke about this one too much. My tutor, or the man who would be my tutor who was interviewing me, along with the editor of the Oxford English Dictionary, they wanted to talk about my Hemingway choice, which was The Sun Also Rises. We spoke about Heart of Darkness. We spoke about Sir James Fraser, and we spoke about Nietzsche, The Birth of Tragedy, but we didn't spend too much time on As I Lay Dying. If you had to collate maybe 5 great American novels, that would be hard actually. He's definitely in the top 10 of great American novels. Definitely. And personally, I prefer Faulkner to Hemingway, though why must one choose? 54, The Maltese Falcon by Dashiell Hammett. Another pulpy, hard-boiled, grizzled detective that influenced a lot of noir films. Dashiell Hammett's crime thriller and its hard-boiled hero, Sam Spade, influenced everyone, from Chandler to Le Carré. The Sun Also Rises, 53, by Ernest Hemingway. Hemingway's first and best novel makes an escape to 1920s Spain to explore courage, cowardice, and manly authenticity. That's interesting that they think it's his best. Hemingway was best in his short stories, particularly if you want a good place to start. The long short story, The Snows of Kilimanjaro. There's many more. Hills Like White Elephants really shows the Hemingway technique. Ellipsis, the iceberg theory, where it's what's not said that's more important than what is said. He was a great short story writer. I suppose, what other novels would you put up against The Sun Also Rises, which seems a bit scrappy or scrapped together. It seems relatively incomplete. It seems like it probably should have been a short story. Farewell to Arms, some might say. For Whom the Bell Tolls, others might say. He also liked his Death in the Afternoon, which is about bullfighting. I personally, although it is written very well, I was so disgusted by the topic that I couldn't abide rereading it or placing it in any list. Not a fan of that that practice, but there we go. Sun Also Rises, almost bang in the middle of this list. 52, Lolly Willows by Sylvia Townsend Warner. A young woman escapes convention by becoming a witch in this original satire about England after the First World War. That sounds good, doesn't it? I haven't read that one. 51, The Great Gatsby, of course, F. Scott Fitzgerald. Yeah, the Gatsby had to be here, didn't he? Fitzgerald's Jazz Age masterpiece has become a tantalising metaphor for the eternal mystery of art. Again, I had a friend at Oxford who was obsessed with the closing lines of Gatsby about the boats bobbing onwards, or the green lights. I can't recall the exact quotation, but he was obsessed with it and thought it was one of the most beautiful pieces of prose in English. Gatsby holds up to a reread. I do like the film with Leonardo DiCaprio. Was that Baz Luhrmann who filmed that? They did a really good job with that one. But definitely, if you've read it as a teenager, worth a reread, most certainly. 50, bang in the middle, Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. Yeah, Virginia Woolf had to be here, didn't she? There were plenty of Virginia Woolfs that we could have chosen, but they've gone for Mrs. Dalloway. I would say maybe The Waves should make it as well. Woolf's great novel makes a day of party preparations the canvas for themes of lost love, life choices and mental illness. Yeah, if you had to collect together the writers of the 20th century that did the most interesting things with consciousness, Virginia Woolf would be one of them, along with James Joyce, along with Marcel Proust, of course. Next one, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes by Anita Luce. A guilty pleasure it may be, but it is impossible to overlook the enduring influence of a tale that helped to define the Jazz Age. 48. A Passage to India by E.M. Forster. E.M. Forster's most successful work is eerily prescient on the subject of empire. I've got a stack of Forster, and I've been wanting to get into him in a big way. I particularly liked the aspects of the novel where he famously defined flat versus round characters. Well worth reading for anybody who wants to understand the mechanics of literature. 47, Babbitt by Sinclair Lewis. What it lacks in structure and guile, this enthralling take on 20s America makes up for in vivid satire and characterization. 46, Ulysses, James Joyce. Yeah, I've got this in so many editions. Great novel. Difficult, not as difficult as Finnegan's Wake, obviously. It's going to be on the schedule next year in the Hardcore Literature Book Club. We'll be doing a guided read-along with it so you can understand it. I'm shocked that it's not in the top 10. Absolutely shocked, actually. 46? You're telling me that there's at least 40 more novels that are better than Ulysses in the English language. This did extraordinary things with the English language. He broke the novel, and he was maybe the only writer who could shake off Shakespeare's influence as much as possible. I'm very shocked, and also I don't expect to see Finnegan's Wake on the list, but it should be. But there we go. Next up, 45, The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. Yeah, good, but is it better than Ulysses? No. The story of a blighted New York marriage stands as a fierce indictment of a society estranged from culture. 44, Of Human Bondage by Somerset Maugham. Yeah, so it's going to be a bit of a piss take now as we go down the list, because Maugham, great though he is, and I've read a few of his novels and need to reread them, is not above Ulysses by James Joyce. So if they want to talk about Irish writers getting dealt a disservice in this list, let's just start there. Ulysses at number 46? Really? Number 46? Come on, man. Somerset Maugham's semi-autobiographical novel shows the author's savage honesty and gift for storytelling at their best. 43, The Rainbow by D.H. Lawrence. I've recently picked this up because I went on a bit of a Thomas Hardy binge, and D.H. Lawrence, whose poetry I've enjoyed for a very long time, I had earmarked for the future. And as I know that he was quite heavily influenced by Hardy, I thought that's the logical step next. If I want more Hardy, but I've exhausted my Hardy than D.H. Lawrence. And I must say, I am loving it so far. The Rainbow. Oh, it's just beautiful. Beautiful prose so far. I'm really enjoying it. And we'll probably have a podcast on that one, I'm sure. 42, the 39 Steps by John Buchan. Yeah, it's good. John Buchan's espionage thriller with its sparse contemporary prose is hard to put down. It's a slim one, worth reading. Good modernist book. Then we got Ford Maddox Ford, again, good modernist book, The Good Soldier. Ford's masterpiece is a searing study of moral dissolution behind the facade of an English gentleman, and its stylistic influence lingers to this day. Next up, Zuleika Dobson by Max Beerbohm. The passage of time has conferred a dark power upon Beerbohm's ostensibly light and witty Edwardian satire. The History of Mr. Polly by H.G. Wells. Look, I love Wells, but how are they putting H.G. Wells above Ulysses? So this is going to be the pinnacle with which, because I was already kind of a bit disgruntled that Song of Solomon was quite far down, but okay. And then we get to Ulysses and it's just 46. And H.G. Wells, who I love, I've read tons of Wells, I was obsessed with him as a child. Time Machine, War of the Worlds, The Island of Dr. Moreau, The Invisible Man. Great, good fun, good speculative fiction. Did he do more for literature in the English language than James Joyce? Come on now. The choice is great, but Wells's ironic portrait of a man very like himself is the novel that stands out. The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. Yeah, Wind in the Willows. I picked this up recently. I went to a little nature reserve and there was all the different characters in sculpture form dotted around. And I picked up this one because I'm now making a concerted effort to put together some content for children's books. And we'll be starting with Wind in the Willows, which is a great book. The Evergreen Tale from the Riverbank, and a powerful contribution to the mythology of Edwardian England. 37. Hadrian VII by Frederick Rolfe. This entertaining, if contrived, story of a hack writer and priest who becomes pope sheds vivid light on its eccentric author, described by D.H. Lawrence as a man-demon. Then we have The Golden Bowl by Henry James. American literature contains nothing else quite like Henry James's amazing labyrinthine and claustrophobic novel. Yeah, we're reading in serial form his Turn of the Screw. Henry James is great. He's a great prose stylist. He's well worth reading. Once again, he is not above James Joyce. But there we go. And neither is Jack London's The Call of the Wild. Great book though it is. Jack London's vivid adventures of a pet dog that goes back to nature reveal an extraordinary style and consummate storytelling. Then we have Kim by Rudyard Kipling. In Kipling's classic boy's own spy story, an orphan in British India must make a choice between East and West. Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser. Dreiser was no stylist, but there's a terrific momentum to his unflinching novel about a country girl's American dream. Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. Okay, you may know that in my second year at Oxford, my special author focus was Joseph Conrad, so I read pretty much everything that he put together, and many of my essays were focused on Joseph Conrad. Heart of Darkness was the novel that got me into Conrad. There was a teacher in sixth form who I particularly liked and was quite inspired by, and I remember lingering after class and asking him, what does he recommend I read? And he said, my favourite novel is Heart of Darkness. And I went home that very evening, listened to some Beethoven, and then read the whole thing and was blown away. I need to reread this one. I've been thinking about this for a while. 31, Dracula by Bram Stoker. Yeah, I've been reading this recently because it's autumn and Halloween's coming up. And we're reading Frankenstein together in the book club, but maybe we'll do Dracula at some point. Not saying any more than that. Is it better than Ulysses? This is what the whole video is going to be about now, is it? Just, is this better than Ulysses? That's not better than Ulysses. Well, another Irish writer, so I don't know what they're saying about disservice to Irish writers. Bram Stoker's classic vampire story was very much of its time, but still resonates more than a century later. Yeah, it probably wouldn't fit into many people's designation of great literature, but it is ridiculously resonant. Along with Frankenstein, it's easily the most resonant horror motif of all time. Dracula, the vampires. What Stoker did for that facet of horror literature was tremendous. Worth reading if you haven't. The Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane. Stephen Crane's account of a young man's passage to manhood through soldiery is a blueprint for the great American war novel. 29, Jude the Obscure by Thomas Hardy. This is a book that many people can't even finish because it's so depressing, and many people give up reading altogether, or at least give up reading Hardy because it is so depressing. I recently reread Tess of d'Urberville, and it put me in a very gloomy mood. But Hardy's great. Once again though, well, you know what I'm going to say about Ulysses. Hardy exposed his deepest feelings in this bleak, angry novel, and stung by the hostile response, he never wrote another. Yeah, he gave up writing novels, which is a shame because his novels are great, and then he just pivoted into poetry for the remainder of his life, and he's a great poet, so fair play. But what a shame that he couldn't abide some of the more hostile reviews. What stories would we have if he'd kept writing? New Grub Street by George Gissing. George Gissing's portrayal of the hard facts of a literary life remains as relevant today as it was in the late 19th century. The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, another Irishman. Wilde's brilliantly elusive moral tale of youth, beauty and corruption was greeted with howls of protest on publication. Yeah, it's a shame that so many people have ruined literature in the time, or ruined the writers of great literature, because we appreciate these works now, but the public at the time is almost always wrong, or just misunderstands these great writers. If you'd like to know more about The Picture of Dorian Gray, then we have a podcast, Hardcore Literature episode dedicated to it. We also have a video picking apart Oscar Wilde's famous preface, where he says all art is perfectly useless. It's good Gothic literature. The Sign of Four by Arthur Conan Doyle. I don't know what the criteria is for the ranking here. Is it influence? I don't know what the thoughts underpinning this is, but 26, we have a Sherlock Holmes, who's great, worth reading. Sherlock Holmes' second outing sees Conan Doyle's brilliant sleuth and his bluff sidekick Watson come into their own. 3 Men in a Boat by Jerome K. Jerome takes 25, number 25. The accidental classic about messing about on the Thames remains a comic gem. Then we have Kidnapped by Robert Louis Stevenson. I would wonder what was the decision or the thought process in choosing Kidnapped, which I've read and I have a rare edition of and I love, as opposed to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We'll see. Is he going to say Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in this list? Probably not, because I haven't seen any authors doubled up, but hey, okay. A thrilling adventure story, gripping history and fascinating study of the Scottish character. Kidnapped has lost none of its power. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Yep, contender for the Great American Novel. Mark Twain's tale of a rebel boy and a runaway slave seeking liberation upon the waters of the Mississippi remains a defining classic of American literature. 22, The Way We Live Now by Anthony Trollope. Okay, yeah, Trollope should be in there, but maybe not this high up. Inspired by the author's fury at the corrupt state of England and dismissed by critics at the time, The Way We Live Now is recognised as Trollope's masterpiece. Trollope was vastly prolific and he has many great books to choose from. I have earmarked him for the future because I'm sure I will enjoy tearing through his works. 21, Middlemarch by George Eliot. Okay, we have a Ulysses situation going on here. So you're telling me that there's 20 books, say, better than Middlemarch? Many would say Middlemarch is the best novel written in English. Some have said that the best novel written in English is Moby Dick, and Middlemarch is the best English novel, but it's definitely not 21. It's top 10, man. Top 10, top 5. I'm rereading it now, and we're going to have some lectures coming out at the end of November onwards, doing a read-along, guided reading with this wonderful masterpiece of a novel, but there we go. Apparently Little Women, which is a period piece. I understand that many people love this book, and that's fair enough. It's many readers' favourite. But it is not better than Middlemarch for many reasons. But anywho, Louisa May Alcott. Her highly original tale, aimed at a young female market, has iconic status in America and never been out of print. Somebody tell me how Louisa May Alcott's Little Women got above George Eliot's Middlemarch. Someone venture that for me, I'd like to know. That's not me disparaging Louisa May Alcott, I'm just saying Middlemarch is the better novel. The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins. Middlemarch is also better than this. Wilkie Collins' masterpiece, which is a good novel though, hailed by many as the greatest English detective novel, is a brilliant marriage of the sensational and the realistic. If you're interested in detective fiction, then yeah, The Moonstone is worth reading, definitely. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland at number 18 by Lewis Carroll. Lewis Carroll's brilliant nonsense tale is one of the most influential and best loved in the English canon. Yeah, to be fair, this has to be quite high up. So I'm not surprised, I'm not disappointed. It needs to be high up. It was tremendously influential. And for what it was, quite brilliant as well. 17, Moby Dick. Again, you're going to say there's 16 better novels than Moby Dick. I understand that the competition is getting stiff now, but Moby Dick is a top 10, surely. Wise, funny and gripping, Melville's epic work continues to cast a long shadow over American literature. Well, putting it mildly, it's a prose poem epic of biblical proportions, and Melville really did throw down a gauntlet, and who has really matched him or come close to him? Maybe Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian has come close, but he's working in the shadow of Moby Dick. If you haven't read Moby Dick, then please do. 16, The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. It's good to see there's lots of Americans here. American literature is very, very strong. I had a teacher who called American literature an oxymoron. This is not true. It's one of the best globally in the literary tradition. Nathaniel Hawthorne's astounding book is full of intense symbolism and as haunting as anything by Edgar Allan Poe. Yeah, Edgar Allan Poe, I know he's good fun, but he shouldn't be in a top anything list. Not top 10 at least. David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. Okay, so that was Dickens, one of his favourite choices, his personal favourite. He loved David Copperfield, but this is interesting that if you're going to choose one Dickens, why you chose David Copperfield. And I'm not ragging on David Copperfield, I'm not saying it's bad, but Great Expectations is better. I'm pretty sure he has a handful of novels that are better. Bleak House, better. Our Mutual Friend, better. But okay, there's obviously some guiding reason underneath this choice. Maybe you can help me figure it out. David Copperfield marked the point at which Dickens became the great entertainer and also laid the foundations for his later, darker masterpieces. Okay, Vanity Fair by William Thackeray. Yeah, I don't know if it should be number 14 though. William Thackeray's masterpiece set in Regency England is a bravura performance by a writer at the top of his game. Okay, you're going to put Thackeray above Dickens. Interesting. Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte deserves to be high up, but wonderful though it is, and compelling though it is, and beautifully wrought though it is, it's not better than Middlemarch. Emily Bronte's windswept masterpiece is notable not just for its wild beauty, but for its daring reinvention of the novel form itself. Then we have Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Charlotte Bronte's erotic Gothic masterpiece became the sensation of Victorian England. Its great breakthrough was its intimate dialogue with the reader. Then we have Sybil by Benjamin Disraeli. Really? The future Prime Minister displayed flashes of brilliance that equalled the greatest Victorian novelists. The narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket by Edgar Allan Poe. Are you taking... Come on now. Someone's having a joke here. Number 10. Let's have a little think over what Edgar Allan Poe's obscure piece of writing beat. Who did he beat? Middlemarch, George Eliot. Wuthering Heights, Ulysses, Song of Solomon, Moby Dick. Come on, man. Edgar Allan Poe's only novel, a classic adventure story with supernatural elements, has fascinated and influenced generations of writers. Shouldn't be in the list. Gonna say it right here. Shouldn't be in the list. Nightmare Abbey by Thomas Love Peacock. The great pleasure of Nightmare Abbey, which was inspired by his friendship with Shelley, lies in the delight the author takes in poking fun at the romantic movement. And he does it so well that it's the 9th greatest novel in English of all time. Come on, man. Frankenstein. I love Frankenstein. It's my favourite piece of Gothic literature. Beautifully written, compelling story. We're reading it as a weekend read in the book club for Halloween. I love it. I've read it countless times at this point, and I will continue reading it and enjoying it. It's not the 8th best novel in the English language, and if we're talking women writers, the the conversation after this list was that women writers were dealt a disservice because they made up a quarter of the list. The real disservice is the fact that they have arbitrarily placed the women writers seemingly anywhere. Mary Shelley above George Eliot, Louisa May Alcott above George Eliot, and above Charlotte Bronte. I mean, it doesn't really make sense, but okay. Mary Shelley's first novel has been hailed as a masterpiece of horror and the macabre. 7. Emma by Jane Austen. Jane Austen's Emma is her masterpiece, mixing the sparkle of her early books with a deep sensibility. I would say that her masterpiece is Persuasion, her last novel, posthumously published, along with Northanger Abbey, published after her death. Persuasion is very, very mature. It's an autumnal novel. If I had to only read one Jane Austen novel forever, cliché though it may be, I would plump for Pride and Prejudice, however. Then we have The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy Gentleman by Lawrence Sterne. Does anyone read this anymore? We read it in Oxford, but Lawrence Sterne's vivid novel caused delight and consternation when it first appeared and has lost little of its original bite. Tom Jones by Henry Fielding, number 5. Okay, it's influential. It's definitely influential. What criteria are we rating this by? If influence, then would I say it's the most influential, the 5th most? I don't know. Tom Jones is a classic English novel that captures the spirit of its age and whose famous characters have come to represent Augustan society in all its loquacious, turbulent, comic variety. Number 4, Clarissa. I agree with this. Clarissa by Samuel Richardson, 1748. I've proudly shown off my multi-volume set of Clarissa many times. I would agree with it being this high up. And many people have said Clarissa's boring, which I don't really understand. You should definitely check it out if you haven't already. Persevere across the first few pages, get to grips with the older style of writing, get to know the characters, vividly imagine everything, sympathise with Clarissa, and you will be absolutely taken away by this masterpiece. Masterpiece is correct. It's up there as one of the greatest novels of all time with Marcel Proust's In Search of Lost Time. So, yes, this should be high up. 3, Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. I love Swift. He's one of the greatest satirists. Tale of the Tub, Battle of the Books. He is absolutely wonderful. I read him frequently and with gusto. But is he above Clarissa? Is Gulliver's Travels? No. I mean, Gulliver's Travels is perhaps not even the best piece of utopia fiction. I'm thinking of Thomas More, Utopia, thinking a little bit about Plato's Republic, but there we go. Gulliver's Travels, a satirical masterpiece that's never been out of print. It comes 3rd in our list of the best novels. Okay, what does he say about Clarissa? Clarissa is a tragic heroine pressured by her unscrupulous nouveau rich family to marry a wealthy man she detests. In the book that Samuel Johnson described as the first book in the world for the knowledge it displays of the human heart, Johnson also said that we must read Clarissa not for the content, but the sentiment. And that's worth keeping in mind if you breach it. Number 2, Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe. A very important book, no one can argue that. One of the first early novels. If you read The Rise of the Novel by Ian Watt, he calls it basically the first novel, or what we would agree upon being a novel in English. Of course, there are earlier novels in other languages. It's stripped of emotion. Now, it's a very resonant theme, Robinson Crusoe, and we all know the story, whether we've read it or not. But Crusoe, as a novel, we can see that Defoe was kind of starting on his own stranded island with the novel form. And so it's exciting for what would become of the literary tradition and the novel in the English language, rather than in and of itself. By the end of the 19th century, no book in English literary history had enjoyed more editions, spin-offs and translations. Crusoe's world-famous novel is a complex literary confection, and it's irresistible. 1. The Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan, a story of a man in search of truth told with the simple clarity and beauty of Bunyan's prose make this the ultimate English classic. No one really reads this one because it's so overtly allegorical. This is also true for Spenser's The Fairy Queen. We like works of symbolism. We like Moby Dick, we like Les Miserables, but we don't, for some reason, like overt allegory anymore. Be interesting to know what happened, what shifted in the culture exactly and why we don't. But I'd actually say that though the Pilgrim's Progress seems to always be in print and people always seem to be buying it, I don't think it's that popular. I think it's very under-read and read only by specialists studying the English language. So there we have it, the top 100 greatest novels in the English language according to the Guardian newspaper. One can see how they most certainly should come under scrutiny, and one can see why people have had problems with it and why it's been a bit controversial. For me, the main controversy is the fact that the ordering, I can't see the rationale behind why some novels, great though they are placed above other novels. I had a problem with Ulysses being where it was 46, wasn't it? I had a problem with Middlemarch being where it was, and though some of the novels in the top 10, for example, or the top 20 were great and should have been on the list, they shouldn't have been in the top 10 or the top 20, great though they were. What should have happened is many of the novels that were thrown in just for seemingly the sake of it, because they're a modern fad or a modern trend, I don't know the rationale, they should have been displaced to make room for those, and others could have also been fit in as well. So for me, the main tragedy is the fact that the ordering was so arbitrary. Putting H.G. Wells, for example, above James Joyce, that was a shame. That was a shame. It makes me wonder what criteria critics are using to say that one book is better than another. Or are all the books equal and it's just 100? That can't possibly be true. We would think that one is the better book than 10, but in my opinion, there were many that needed to be in the top 10 that simply weren't. Ulysses, Moby Dick, Middlemarch, for example. Let me know what you think. What did you think of the list? What did they get right? What did they get wrong? What did they leave out? And if you're interested, I might do a part 2, deep diving and maybe even putting together my own list. Thank you very much for watching. If you've liked this video, then please hit the like button and subscribe, because that tells me to keep making more content. Have a lovely day and happy reading.